So we're talking about doing another one of these crossovers. A lot of people would watch this one, my friends. On this episode of 5 Rounds on the 5 Reasons Sports Network, we're going to dive into the call out and the fact that, yeah, it's looking very, very likely that Tyson Fury is going to fight Francis Ngannou, boxing champion versus MMA champion. Thank everyone for stopping in. Want to remind you, every episode of 5 Rounds is proudly served by the official sports bar of Donno Daily and 5 Rounds, and that is the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. Guys, the Quarterdeck has the freshest seafood. They got TVs covering every wall. And for the fight fans out there, you got to remember, every UFC pay-per-view is available at zero cover charge at the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. Take a look at their menu. Find the location nearest to you. They're all over Broward County down here in South Florida. Go to their website. You can find the full menu there, location list, quarterdeckrestaurants.com. The Quarterdeck, come for the food, stay for the fun. I'm Alex Donno alongside James Walker. No Frank Zaffrey today. I think he might be training a little bit too hard. He needed a rest. But James, how you been?
I've been good, man. I've been good. A lot of interesting stuff going on in the world of MMA and the crossover stuff. This will be an interesting discussion because generally I am kind of against these crossover fights, but I think I'm leaning towards this one at least coming to fruition. I think there's a lot of positives. There's some negatives too, though. I'm sure we'll get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hold on, I'm in a mini crisis here. I don't know why. I have my MacBook plugged in, but it says it's about to die. Oh my God, is the power outlet not working? Hopefully my MacBook does not die in a minute before our very eyes. But I want to play you guys a little bit of video. This is a couple videos here from the call out.
All good.
So first thing there, I like when he tries to call him Mike Tyson. But one of the first things that stands out there about this, James, is they're talking about doing a mixed rules fight. And if it's like, okay, if Francis Ngannou is done with MMA now, why not just box him? So they're talking about doing a mixed rules fight with smaller gloves, probably something more similar to MMA gloves, but it's technically boxing rules, right? Punches only. I don't understand, if you're doing something like that, why you've got to make it gimmicky. Why wouldn't you just box?
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I mean, mixed rules to me means the actual rules of combat are mixed, not the gloves or what have you. And we all know Tyson Fury isn't going into that realm. There's really no reason for him to go into that realm. He has the leverage in this case that, if the fight's going to happen, it's going to happen under his wing in terms of his style and his preference. Ngannou doesn't have that kind of leverage, but Ngannou knows that he can get the biggest payday that he's ever had in his career. He probably make more money in this fight than he's made in his 10, last 10 UFC fights combined. So it makes sense. I'm not hating on this idea. I mean, there's some fights where I'm like, mixed fights where I'm like, that's just silly. I wouldn't have any interest in it. I actually would have some interest in this, even though I feel like I kind of know the result.
Right. Yeah. And I think you hit on it. That's why, personally, if you're asking me to give my selfish opinion as a fight fan, I'm not interested in this because you just outlined it, James.
Yeah.
We all know how it's going to end. We all know that if you're talking about punches only, I don't care how big the gloves are. If you're using 4-ounce gloves or 40-ounce gloves, like, we know Tyson Fury, who's an absolute craftsman in the sweet science. If you don't allow takedowns and you don't allow kicks and all the other different techniques, elbows and knees that you can use in MMA, the Tyson Fury is going to slice through Francis Ngannou like a knife through butter. Okay, so thank you so much, Alex M. Cafecito shot. I love it. I appreciate you giving something into the super chat. But like, there's really no suspense here, right? Because I know Tyson Fury is going to easily beat Francis Ngannou. He might do the Floyd Mayweather thing, like with Conor McGregor, where he carries him for a few rounds, right? Maybe lets Ngannou look like he's actually dangerous, and then Fury just turns it on, right? And he looked really good against Dillian Whyte this past weekend. And what a moment, by the way, for Tyson Fury. Englishman fighting in his home country. 94,000 people. They set a record at Wembley. 94,000 people there to watch Tyson Fury, and he gets the 6-round knockout. I mean, that was a beautiful, beautiful moment. Now, so selfishly as a fight fan, because my thing is, James, I think that if both of these guys were to stick to their respective sports, I think there are bigger fights to be had. Bigger for me. It may not be bigger for their wallet.
What's your criteria for bigger, quote unquote?
So, like, here's where I go from a Tyson Fury point of view, and he claims he's walking away from boxing. Period. That was his swan song. That victory against Whyte in front of 94,000 people, that was his exit, and he wants to, retire on top. If he were to stick with boxing, though, I would love to see him unify the heavyweight titles by taking on the winner of the upcoming Anthony Joshua Alexander Usyk fight. That would make a lot of sense, and that would be, to me, as a boxing fan, that would be a lot bigger than Tyson Fury putting on some miniature gloves and playing patty cake with Francis Ngannou, right? Then from a Francis Ngannou standpoint, if he can come to terms with the UFC, or if the UFC can come to terms with him, because I think he knows how much money he wants to make, they just don't want to meet him there, then, hey, I think a potential fight with John Bones Jones is, to me, as a true fight fan, 100 times bigger than him boxing against Tyson Fury. But I can understand, James, and appreciate the fact that, especially, I think, from Francis Ngannou's point of view, because I think he actually has more to gain from this than Tyson Fury.
Yeah.
Like, Tyson Fury probably looks at this like, oh, I'm going to box this bloke. He's not even a boxer. He's an MMA fighter. I can make some easy money here, eh, lads? Like, yeah, it's no, like, because they're talking about Tyson Fury. I heard this from a promoter who may put on this fight, that Tyson Fury would make 90 million, and I think 90 million pounds, not dollars. So I think that's like 100 million plus for this fight. I don't know what Ngannou would make if it's a half of that, a third of that. It would still be more money than he could ever and has ever made in the octagon. And it would be such a high profile moment in his career. And it sounds to me like for Francis Ngannou, boxing a high profile guy like Tyson Fury, who seems into it, that's a lifelong dream for him. That's like a bucket list thing for him. So I think Francis Ngannou, for him, monetarily and just for his pride, I think this probably means more to him than it does to Tyson Fury.
Yeah, you're right about that. And you brought up an interesting point that, each fighter could make in the tens of millions, with Tyson Fury making 90 or so, and Ngannou, maybe making a third, 30 million or whatever it would be. That brings up an interesting spotlight on both sports, because why can't Tyson Fury fight the best of boxing and make 90 million? And why can't Francis Ngannou fight the best in MMA and make 30 million? There's some loophole or something, that a void there, to where, it seems like both respective sports, and maybe they're, the head of the UFC and the head of the Boxing Athletic Commission or whatever, can't seem to get it together to where they can have those huge money fights, to where you almost have to make it gimmicky in order to make the most money. Floyd Mayweather probably made more money fighting Conor McGregor than he did Manny Pacquiao. Maybe Pacquiao's a bad example, but
yeah, I want to say I think he made more from Pacquiao, but I'm not so sure on the back end though, because I think the Pacquiao still had a higher pay-per-view revenue as well, but the McGregor fight had a gigantic pay-per-view number. So yeah, I think he made more from Pacquiao.
Yeah, well, any fight other than Pacquiao, he probably made more. And I think there's something wrong with that. There should be some kind of financial reward for the best in MMA fighting the best in MMA, and the best in boxing fighting the best in boxing. And until that's pretty much standard across the board, I think you're going to have an increase in these gimmicky, propositions. Just because there's so much money involved for everybody. It's not just the fighters. It's the, right. It's the promoters. It's the agents. It's the, marketing people. It's the pay-per-view people. It's everybody. There's more money involved. There's more incentive for it to happen.
Yeah. And listen, when I talk about not necessarily wanting to see this fight, let me set the record straight. Of course, I'm going to watch it. Like, if it happens, I'm going to be into it. I think the press tour will be pretty epic, probably a little awkward. There was something when I was watching their in-ring exchange, because it's from the way that this was clearly planned, because Tyson Fury had invited Francis into there were like 100 people in the ring when he was doing his post-fight interview. And he wasn't like, Francis was not in his in his eye shot, but he still knew. He's like, oh, I want to bring Francis in here, talk to Francis. So it was clearly a planned thing, very cordial in-ring exchange between the two. Tyson found a way to make it weird. Like the press tour for this, let me pull this up and people know what I'm talking about. I had never heard this slang term before that Fury threw. I don't know what the kids are talking about now in the UK these days, but here was Tyson Fury taking it to a very awkward place.
He's a good looking Javi, isn't he?
Yeah.
Have you got a big Corey? You got a big Corey?
Big what?
Big Corey. You got a big Corey.
Oh my god! Oh my god! That was. I mean, did you see Ngannou's reaction? The first, you go big Corey, and then Ngannou was just like, "What? I don't understand." Like, obviously, English is not his first language, and even English is my first language. I had no idea at first what Tyson was talking about. You go big Corey, and then like the third time he figures it out, and then Ngannou was just like, "Oh, bro, you had to make it weird." Like the press tour is going to be crazy, you know that.
Yep, and that's that's what sells the fight, and this I'm interested in. I mean, it's is Ngannou a legitimate threat to Tyson Fury? Probably not. I would like it to be straight boxing rules, just like McGregor was straight boxing rules with Floyd Mayweather. It wasn't a mixed a mixed rules bout. It wasn't special gloves or mixed rules in between rounds. So I think it's I think there's a lot of money to be made. I think it should happen. And for Ngannou, man, look, the sport of MMA is not based on one fighter. To where if he leaves MMA, the sport of MMA continues and is still going to thrive, and the UFC is going to be fine. And for Francis, he can make more money in one fight and have his family set and his descendants and everybody else set, for the rest of their lives. So I just see too many positives for this not to happen. I'm definitely all for it.
So okay, here's maybe the most complicated question here, because no matter how much we talk about this, I think it's gonna happen. And even if I can say, hey, like as an old school fight fan, this isn't really what I want, but people want this, they're gonna watch it. Here's the $1 million question, or the multi-million-dollar question, right? Because Ngannou, and he made an appearance on the MMA Hour this week, and it sounds as though he's still open to negotiating with the UFC. He's out of contract. He's just sitting out like the rest of the time frame for his contract. I think it's about another half a year or so. He's still sitting out the rest of his contract, and then he's a free agent. Obviously, the UFC has at least some interest in keeping their heavyweight champion. And Ngannou said it that, hey, like, yeah, I will negotiate with the UFC, but whatever we come up with has to include them allowing me to take this fight, that I'm gonna box, that I'm not gonna do exclusive MMA, that if they want to keep me here or bring me back, I've got to be able to do this. And I don't think he said it openly, but I'm sure he would probably want to pursue potential other boxing bouts that could come from this one. So then obviously, James, if the UFC were to re-sign Ngannou, then I'm sure they would find a way to get a piece of the pie. Like they got a piece of the pie in the McGregor-Mayweather fight, or Mayweather-McGregor, to say it properly. They were a co-promoter of that. I'm sure they would want to be a co-promoter of this one. Is that something the UFC would be interested in? Because I know what Frank would say if he was here, that he would be concerned if Ngannou gets clowned by Tyson Fury, which is probably what's going to happen. That, is that damaging to the MMA brand or his brand in MMA? So do you think the UFC is on board with the idea of, okay, champ, we'll re-sign you, we'll pay you more money, and we'll let you do this boxing thing as long as we can have a piece of it? Is that the right thing for the UFC to do?
Is it the right thing? I think purely business standpoint, it would be the right thing. Will the UFC do it? Does the UFC feel it's the right thing? I don't think they do. The situations between McGregor then and Ngannou now are completely different. There's animosity right now between Ngannou's camp. There's a lot of animosity between Ngannou's camp and the UFC and Dana White. There was no animosity between McGregor and Dana White at the time.
Right.
That's a huge difference. The way the UFC does business, particularly the way Dana White does business, is look, he could be your best friend or your biggest enemy. And right now, he's an enemy of Francis Ngannou. And, with McGregor, he was, they were always on good terms, even now today. McGregor and UFC is always on good terms, and they do great business. So he was willing to kind of open that box, that Pandora's box, which, years later, that's kind of costing them now, because this is the kind of situation Ngannou wants. Say, hey, they did it for McGregor, how come they're not doing it for me? But I think the animosity factor plays a huge role in this, to where the UFC, even, if they do co-promoting and get involved in this, and they could make a nice chunk of change doing it, I just don't think they're on good enough terms with Ngannou right now, the way they'd work something out. And after Ngannou makes this fight, which he probably wants this to be his next fight, he's not going to get in the octagon before he gets in the boxing ring. So after he gets his fight, he's going to make so much money that he's going to probably realize anyway, hey, I don't need, $500K to get into an octagon again. I just
he's probably going to make
30 million.
$40 million in this fight. Yeah, I'll say that here's the way I think the UFC are going to look at it. And actually, you brought up a great point that the relationship isn't good between the two. So the UFC may not want to bend over backwards to give him something unconventional like this. I think if you purely look at it in a vacuum from a promotional standpoint, I think if the UFC were to re-sign him and let him do this Tyson Fury fight, honestly, I think if you just strictly look at this one situation, I think it's good for the UFC, because honestly, James, anybody who's got half a brain cell in their head and who understands combat sports at a rudimentary level would figure out that if he gets outclassed by an actual boxing champion in a kind of boxing match, doesn't really mean anything. Like that doesn't say anything less about Francis Ngannou as an MMA fighter, that he's challenging himself in a new sport. This is a dream for him. It's a crossover. I think most people with more than like a 40 IQ would understand that he's still an amazing MMA fighter, even if he gets clowned by Tyson Fury. And you know what? The same way that it did for Conor McGregor with Floyd Mayweather, that made McGregor a bigger star. Like, McGregor lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr., and he was a much bigger star despite losing the fight. I think it's more than likely the same thing would happen with Francis Ngannou. It's more than likely, even if he loses soundly, it's going to make him a bigger star, and thus it's going to put more of a spotlight on the UFC when he fights. But I think, along with what you said about the animosity between the two sides, which is a fantastic point, I think the UFC also doesn't want to go out of their way to set that precedent again. Like, I know that they did it once with Conor McGregor, but they probably thought, hey, like, everybody understands this is Conor freaking McGregor. He was a huge star at the time, still is, but I think an even bigger star at that time. We're making an exception here. Like, this is not something we're going to do for anybody else, even if it is the heavyweight champion. We're doing this one time for McGregor. We're not even letting him do it again after this if he's under contract with us. And that's just where it ends. And now, if the UFC lets Ngannou do it as well, it's like, okay, so this is a thing that they're doing, that we can now use this in contract negotiations, that the Diaz brothers, I'm sure, when they're trying to negotiate, are going to say, well, look what you just did for Francis Ngannou. It sets a precedent. So I think if the UFC looks at it in a vacuum, in this one case, Ngannou getting that rub from a big-time boxing fight could help them make more money off of him in the future, but I don't think they want other people with any positions of power in negotiation to be able to use the precedent of what just happened with Ngannou. Because if they do it one time with McGregor, it's like, hey, you guys see, we're never doing that again. But then you do it again with Francis, and all of a sudden, it's a thing we're doing now.
Yeah, no, it's a great, excellent point, because McGregor, throughout his career, has always kind of been in his own lane, where he can move different weight classes. He can come back and get title shots, or at least in the conversation of title shots. He can do boxing, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, oh, well, it's Conor McGregor. He's in a lane of his own. That's okay. But you're right. If you throw Francis Ngannou in there, then all of a sudden it's a thing. So then, yeah, like you said, Nate Diaz and some other people come in. But you brought a good point about Ngannou, being able to sell more pay-per-views after this fight. That's true. It will make him more popular and a bigger pay-per-view draw. But as we've seen with Conor McGregor, will it make him a better fighter? I feel like Conor McGregor wasn't a better fighter. He was a worse fighter after fighting Mayweather, whether it was the money, whether it was the cross-training, whether it was – even Conor changed his stance and didn't really – everything after that Mayweather fight was just different for the worse with Conor McGregor. So you wonder with Francis Ngannou, once he gets that big bank in his pocket, will he be the same hungry, determined fighter as he once was? I'm sure the UFC, that's important to the UFC. If they sign him to a multi-fight deal, they want the best Francis Ngannou that they can get, in the octagon. So I don't think that's going to happen once he gets that big check. I just think it's human nature. like I said, he may not even want to fight again. I think it'll be really hard to fight if you make $30 to $40 million to come back to an octagon and fight for $500K or even $1 million. You know, even 1/30th or 1/40th of what you made in that one fight. I think it'd be very hard for him to do. And I don't see him doing it.
And he doesn't seem like the type like Conor McGregor, when he gets the $40 million bag, he's probably spent it like within a week, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think Francis would be. I think Francis would like invest in mutual funds and like, you know, be pretty careful. Maybe he'll buy a few Bitcoin with that money. Like he's not gonna go too hog wild with it. So he probably won't have some of the same lifestyle incentives to keep fighting afterwards. This is a fantastic question from Alex M. I kind of hate the fact, though, that he asked this because it's going to make me say something I don't want to say. But he said, if you could only sign one, if you, I guess, being the UFC, who would you sign? Francis Ngannou or Nate Diaz, who are both in contract disputes? I hate to say it, James, but the answer's got to be Francis Ngannou.
Yeah.
You're talking about the heavyweight champion in his
the
prime.
belt.
Like, you know, Nate Diaz is a guy who's fun to watch, but you know, he's probably a little bit past his prime.
That hurt to say it.
It hurts to say it. He's just a little bit past his prime, and he's probably never going to be a conventional champion in that, or just a money champ. But he's never going to be a conventional champion. So no, it's got to be Ngannou. There's such a higher ceiling, right? Because with Ngannou, you're already pretty high with that guy in terms of how much money he can make you, and the trajectory is still going up. Whereas with Diaz, the trajectory is sloping down. So if you're talking about investments, Ngannou is the investment to make. You agree?
Yeah, I agree. And Ngannou, if he's focused on MMA and he, you know, this is what he wants to do for the next few years, I mean, he has a chance to put himself on the Mount Rushmore, really, of heavyweights. I mean, he's beat Stipe. He's already beat some people that you would consider on the Mount Rushmore. You know, already. So, you know, he has a chance, but I don't think that's where his head is. Like you said, I don't see Francis Ngannou as the type of person that, you know, will fight too long into his career span and hang on too long just to make a few bucks, you know? So I think that's a big motivation for him to make a lot of money right now and get his ex and go on with the rest of his life. He's already had a tough life. A lot of people don't talk about this either. Like, the first half of his life was tough. You know, all the stuff he had to go through to get out of his home country and get to the United States, even just to train and become an MMA fighter, was brutal. So for him to get from where he came from to where he is now is a phenomenal story in itself. So to have a chance to really set himself up and set his family up for generations to come, you know, I could never hate on that for him to be able to do that. So I'd say go for as much money as possible and then decide what you want to do from there. If it's still fight, then fight. If it's not, you want to enjoy the rest of your life after making $40 million, you could do that too. You know, the sport of MMA will move on. Francis will be, you know, secured and, you know, after living a rough life, you know, it's a phenomenal story. So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, and if I'm being real here, it's like, because one of the questions I've been asking myself the last few days, since, you know, it's become very apparent Tyson Fury is going to box Francis Ngannou, and that I think that kind of strengthens Francis's position against the UFC, right? Because the UFC, I'm sure, could say, yeah, guy, you're threatening. Your leverage play is you're telling us if we don't re-sign you, you're going to go box Tyson Fury. Good luck with that. But then it turns out Tyson Fury really does want to fight Francis. So I think that gives Francis some more leverage. But at the end of the day, how badly does either side really need one another, right? Because, like, I get it. The fans, they want to see the undisputed heavyweight champion keep fighting the best of the best in the octagon. I get it that it would be the best thing for the fans for him to at some point continue his UFC career. But, you know, the UFC, they were printing money long before Francis Ngannou ever really rose to the top of his stardom. And there are now could be a really powerful injection of life into the heavyweight division, because we're probably this summer going to get John Jones against Stipe Miocic. Now, especially if John Jones wins that fight, then the UFC's really set, because you're going to get like a nice story arc of John Jones potentially becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion. If Stipe wins, then you're kind of still at square one. But still, you've got an injection of John Jones coming to the heavyweight division. And the UFC, they're going to find plenty of ways to make money off of their fights. They don't, like, their business does not rely on Francis Ngannou, okay? Like, And then from Francis Ngannou's point of view, for all the reasons we've talked about, if he can do, even if it's only one more fight and he gets paid roughly 40 million to fight Tyson Fury, that's probably more than he would make in 5 or 6 UFC fights, which is probably all he would have left in his career at this point anyway. So I honestly, just from a negotiating standpoint, I don't think either side needs each other as much as we as fans would like to think they do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it was almost like the UFC was rooting for him to lose to Ciryl Gane, in January, just so they can kind of relieve themselves of this whole scenario playing out. Now, unfortunately for the UFC, he won. And so this scenario is very much in play. I think if he would have lost to Gane, I don't think he would have got this Tyson Fury fight as well. So that would have gave the UFC all the leverage in the world, to keep Ngannou at a much lower rate, and they don't have to worry about him boxing the heavyweight champion. So yeah, I mean, him winning the belt, I think, brought up all these headaches. But yeah, the UFC will be fine if Jon Jones wins the interim title fight this summer, and he's the interim champ, and it kind of rolls over into Francis Ngannou relinquishing the belt. I don't think anybody, the UFC doesn't miss a beat with that. If anything, Jones might even be a bigger draw at this very moment in terms of pay-per-view buys. That could change after the Tyson Fury fight. But right now, I think Jones is a bigger draw at heavyweight. So yeah, this is probably one of the situations where it's just best for them to amicably part ways. It seems like Ngannou has a plan. His business, managers have a plan of how to get this heavyweight, boxing bout, and they can make a lot of money. In the UFC already has a plan. They're hoping Jon Jones can come in and win the interim title and kind of take over the heavyweight division, so everybody can move on, go their separate ways, and be happy. And for the fans, we can enjoy both sides. We don't have to pick and choose. We don't have to say, okay, I'm just going to watch the UFC, or going to watch Francis Ngannou wherever he goes. We can. We don't have to choose a side. We can enjoy both sides of it.
True. And also, I want to give Ngannou a little bit of credit. While I don't see any scenario where he can actually beat Tyson Fury in his quote unquote boxing debut, hybrid fight, whatever. But okay, so if he takes that fight, maybe he looks a little bit better than some people expect, still loses. Maybe Tyson carries him a little bit, but Francis, he's such an incredible athlete. We saw he just added a takedown game out of nowhere before this Ciryl Gane fight. So we know this guy is a sponge. We know he can learn quickly. He's like upper 1% of athletes on planet Earth, maybe upper 2%. I don't want to take too much credit away from some of the great athletes out there. But, if he were to really devote time and say, you know what, I got some promotional rub off the Tyson Fury thing. Now I want to commit to 4 or 5 semi-high profile boxing fights, not as difficult as the Tyson Fury fight, he might be able to do well for himself. So I don't want to take all that credit away. Now, as far as the UFC heavyweight division, Alex M points out heavyweight division has never been deeper. It is getting deeper. So he asked, if Francis is gone, what's the next heavyweight title matchup? I completely agree with Tony 2x scenario. So here's what I would do, Tony. I would kind of similar to what you're saying. Jones versus Stipe. If you just want to call that the interim belt when they fight, that's fine. And then maybe the winner of that fight, then you say that they're going to fight Ciryl Gane, who is still the number 1 contender, even after losing to Ngannou. He's still the number 1 ranked guy in that weight class. Have Jones versus Stipe, and then the winner of that fight fights Ciryl Gane, and then you call it the undisputed title after that. That'll give you, several months to kind of sort out, is Francis coming back? Is he not coming back? So you do Jones versus Stipe in the meantime, and then when you're 100% sure Francis isn't coming back, you have the winner of that fight fight Ciryl Gane for the undisputed belt. Yeah,
that sounds like a perfect idea, and the heavyweight division is getting deep. I wonder if you make Gane fight, fight Tuivasa or someone like that, to kind of have like a 4-man tournament. Gane fought
or Blades,
yeah, Blades. Yeah. That's a good point. You can have kind of a 4-man tournament in the meantime for the rest of the calendar year. Have all 4 fight in the summer, and then have all the winner, 2 winners fight at the end of the year. So. That makes a lot of sense. And that's a way for the UFC to kind of put on some big-time heavyweight fights and let everyone know that, hey, we're moving on if he doesn't want to jump back on the train, if Ngannou doesn't want to jump back on.
What do you think, moving on here, of this Jose Aldo call-out? He doesn't usually call people out by name. He really, really, really wants to fight Aljamain Sterling for the belt. The problem is, it looks like TJ Dillashaw is the next guy for Sterling. And then you also have potentially Henry Cejudo. I mean, Henry Cejudo, he's back in the USADA protocol. He's coming back. I know he wants to fight Volkanovski for the 145 belt.
It's a bad idea.
Which it just like he's like 5'0". Like it's probably not a great idea for him. But yeah, he's the former bantamweight champion. So if he wanted to, he could probably step right back into a title fight in his weight class. And Aldo is not very kind to these guys. He says, let the rest of the boys fighting each other and exchanging insults on the internet. In my opinion, it does not make any sense to let a guy who got suspended for 2 years for cheating, talking about Dillashaw, to come back and fight for the belt after winning a split decision in a fight I think he lost. That is true. I thought he lost that fight as well. And then the other one is a clown talking about Cejudo. He's a clown who faked his retirement just to raise his purse. As that did not work, now he wants to fight for the title after spending 2 years out of the game and out of the USADA pool, and, kind of hinting on, hey, he's been out of that pool for 2 years. And for what it's worth, I saw Cejudo a couple months ago. He looks jacked. I'm not accusing him of anything, but he looks like he's been spending some time in the gym during his time away. So he says, so let's fight for the title while they sell popcorn in the arena. He said, whoever sells more popcorn fights with whoever wins our fight. Deal. Let's do this, champ. It's actually, honestly, he cut deep because what he said about both those guys is true. I honestly, I don't feel great about Dillashaw being in the position he's in. And with Henry Cejudo, I think he's got a stronger claim because he did vacate that very belt. So you could say he's got a stronger claim, but he kind of is right. Like this guy he called the UFC's bluff and then they called his bluff, right? Because he told the UFC Cejudo, he's like, guys, if you don't pay me more, I'm going to retire. And the UFC is like, I guess you're retiring.
Yeah,
we'll see you. We'll see you when we see you. So they called his bluff and he stuck to it. And now he wants to come back with his tail between his legs. So I think Aldo is right about that, and he's on a career renaissance of his own. So I really wouldn't mind him getting a crack.
Yeah, it's interesting coming from Aldo because he's very old school and very humble, and not the type of person that would make a lot of public comments. But he sees the game has changed. I could see a person like Jose Aldo saying, "Man, this game is not what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago." In terms of who gets title shots and who rises up the ranks and all this stuff, it used to just be everything was settled in the octagon and let the chips fall where they may. And now, people are retiring, unretiring. People are coming back from suspensions. As he mentioned, people are talking trash and talking their way up the rankings and into title shots. So, yeah, I could see an old school person like Aldo just kind of looking at this and kind of shaking his head about the whole thing. But, does Jose Aldo deserve a title shot at this point? I don't know. I don't know if I think a Dillashaw Henry Cejudo matchup would actually sell more for sure. But yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know if Aldo what's his ranking in the division. I don't know if he jumps the line.
Hold on, I had the rankings open a second ago. Let me pull those back up. So we are in the bantamweight division. He's number 3.
Okay.
He's actually, but Cejudo's not in the rankings, so that he is ahead of Cejudo, who's not in the rankings, but it's Piotr Jan still top in the rankings. Obviously, we would understand if he's got to kind of work his way back up into that. Then Dillashaw number 2, Aldo number 3. So Dillashaw is in front of him in the line, technically.
Got it. So yeah, maybe one big fight against Jan and see if he can get past the former champ and kind of. I think that'll be a nice number 1 contenders bout. Jose Aldo versus Peter Yan, even though they had fought prior. So this will be a second a rematch. So let's see if he's truly title worthy at this point. Let's see if he can beat the former champ.
I like it. And by the way, I think I do actually agree with Alex M that I kind of would like to see Cejudo versus Volk. Because Henry Cejudo, he is like, I just want to see him get the opportunity because he is the most decorated champion in combat sports history. Gold medalist, flyweight champ, bantamweight champ. He's triple C. Give him an opportunity to become quadruple C.
Yeah, I mean that's a great thing to have on your resume. But I don't know. I think absence makes the heart grow fonder, and Henry Cejudo was good, and I would say he was borderline great. But I think him being absent for 2 years kind of makes people think he was even better than what he was. Now, at the time when he was fighting, you wouldn't talk about him going up to certain divisions and beating the current champs at that point. Now he sat out 2 years. All of a sudden, he could beat Volkanovski. He could beat this champ, that champ, and just go and beat every champ in the UFC now. I don't think that's the case, man. He beat Demetrius Johnson. He kind of took the aura off of him and won some title defenses, but I think he's a little bit overrated in my opinion. Even though he's great, I'm not saying he's not great, but he just can't go and just come off of 2 years absence and just beat every champ in the UFC, which he seems to think he can, and all the comments seem to think he can. Color commentary. Thank you very much. Alex, your feed went out. So I'm gonna continue our conversation that we were having about Henry Cejudo. But yeah, my final point on that was that he's tremendous, he's great, but I just don't think he's at that level of beating Volkanovski, who looked pretty much in his prime and as good as ever against the Korean Zombie. So that part of it was tremendous, and I think he's barking up the wrong tree there with Volkanovski. And Alex M, I see here you said you'll pay for Henry versus Volk way better than the Zombie matchup. I agree with that. The Zombie matchup was kind of put together at the last minute because of the Max Holloway fight that was canceled with Holloway bowing out due to injury. So yeah, I mean the Volkanovski fight wasn't what it could have been or what it should have been because he wasn't the best contender. So I do agree with that Cejudo versus Volk would sell tickets, but I don't think it would be as close as a lot of people think. Dougie Fresh, to answer your question here, what's your biggest lesson from ESPN? That's a tough one. Many lessons. I think the biggest lesson is that you always have to be on your A game. I was there for 10 years, and for the entire 10 years, had to be at the top of my game to last that long. A lot of people don't last that long. They're at ESPN. Either there's too much work, too much pressure, things like that. So but I was very focused and motivated throughout the entire time, and I think that's what really helped. Really helped on my end at ESPN covering the NFL, which is probably the toughest sport to cover of all the leagues. So it was a great 10-year run for me there. All right, let's go through the comments here. I did hear, Alex M, did you hear about Kobe claiming brain damage? I did hear about that. You never know with Kobe. I don't want to laugh it off, but he was sucker punched, and what George Masvidal did was wrong by any stretch of the imagination, by any account. So what Kobe puts in it, in the lawsuit is completely up to him. He didn't create the situation, and so he's going to have to, unfortunately, Masvidal is going to have to answer to his, to his actions, unfortunately. What do you think about people blaming Till for Khamzat's performance versus Burns? I haven't heard a lot about that, but that's interesting because Till was a training partner a lot, for Khamzat's fight versus Burns, and Khamzat looked very, very beatable. But I think that was more Burns than anything. I mean, Burns knew he was coming into a tough fight. I don't know if Chimaev thought he was getting into a tough fight, but once he got in there for a couple of rounds, he realized, hey, it's going to be a really tough fight, probably fight of the year candidate. But I don't blame it's kind of hard to blame training partners. I mean, there's only one person that gets in the octagon. That's the fighter. So, I guess people are saying Teal kind of took the shine off of Kazmat in training. Kazmat Chimaev in training, and that's made him a worse fighter. Let's see how Kazmat fights in the next fight. Now, keep in mind, he still beat the number 2 ranked contender in the division. So, people aren't going to give Teal any credit for that. But you can't expect him to just run through everybody. So yeah, I don't think the bromance was at all. I don't think that was an issue. Yeah, thank you for all the donations, by the way. And the great comments. All right. Just got a message from Alex. Looks like he's locked out. So we are actually going to wrap up the show. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Sorry for the unfortunate technical difficulties. And we'll be back at it next week. Huge pay-per-view coming up next week. We have Justin Gaethje against Oliveira for another title fight, which should be very interesting. Oliveira coming off a win against Dustin Poirier. Gaethje coming off a great fight of the year candidate last year, I guess, with Michael Chandler. So that should be an exciting fight. And we're going to get to that a little bit today, but we'll talk about that a lot more next week. So take care, everybody.
is the longest home run at Lone Depot Park.